there was nothing reckless about Mr. Kao. He was not a Rambo kind of operative. And every single action was preceded by a very careful and methodical examination of the pros and cons.
Some individuals leave such a good mark on the destiny of a nation that they are forever remembered. One such personality was RN Kao, the founder of India's external intelligence agency, the Research and Analysis Wing, more popularly known as R&AW or RAW in more popular parlance. But RN Kao was a personality who was an institution builder and somebody who left an indelible mark on the destiny of intelligence in India since he served in the Indian police from 1940 and of course till he retired in 1977. We'll talk about all that. You are on StratNews Global. I am Nitin Gokhale, and this special broadcast is on the occasion of Ramji Kao, as he was better known amongst his peers, friends and family. His birthday is on 10th of May, and he would have been 106 today, that is 10th of May, and therefore we thought we'll have a discussion about his personality and his impact on the organization. And to do that, I have someone who has worked in the R&AW at a very senior position, and someone who also contributed a bit in my writing this biography of RN Kao in 2019, which is perhaps one of the rare books on his personality because he was a very private person. With me is Ramanathan Kumar. You can call him a spook, you can call him an intelligence operative, you can call him an R&W officer, but welcome to this program, and such a pleasure to have you because you have studied Ramji Kao's personality as I have because I wrote this book. So tell me some big highlights of his personality's impact on the organization that you worked in for such a long time.
Thank you very much, Nitin. It's always good to be back on StratNews Global, particularly so as part of this special broadcast that you're having on the occasion of Mr. Kao's 106th birth anniversary. Well, I must confess at the beginning that I am not one of those who had the privilege of really working or interacting with Mr. Kao in flesh and blood, because by the time I joined government service and the R&AW in the mid-1980s, Mr. Kao had sort of faded from the scene. The assassination of Mrs. Gandhi had taken place in 1984. Mr. Kao had tendered his resignation as senior advisor in the cabinet secretariat. And I must also confess that, you know, like all serving intelligence officers, during most of my career, I was busy with the immediate here and now, firefighting on a daily basis. I had little time to think about the founder of the organization. But over a period of time, thanks to various circumstances, yes, I've had an occasion to perhaps become aware of, as you said, the monumental impact that Mr. Kao had in founding and nurturing the R&AW. And of course, now in my retirement, perhaps I've had a little more time to reflect on some of these matters. So, well, you know, your work, of course, is that book that you referred to, RN Kao, Gentleman Spymaster, is indeed one of the few very rare books that one can come across as far as you know, an assessment of the work of Mr. Kao is concerned. There is, of course, much more work to be done because his papers have thus far remained with the Nehru Memorial Museum and Library, now known as the Prime Minister's Museum and Library. Absolutely. They are due to be, a part of it has been released in the
which I used domain, in the
which
book,
you, of
yes.
course, very skillfully used. But much more is still there. It is due to be released at some point of time. So I hope that scholars and researchers like you perhaps will do a little more justice.
Hopefully, there will be a follow-up. Let's see.
So, it's easy to perhaps dwell only on the positive aspects of indeed a great spymaster, and we'll discuss some of those things, in a little more detail.
Right.
But if you permit me, I mean, just to assess Mr. Kao perhaps in a rounded manner.
Sure. Wholesome manner.
In a wholesome manner,
right.
Yes. If you permit me, I thought I would read one passage from another wonderful book written by another legend in the R&AW and in the intelligence community, the late Mr. B. Raman.
Of course.
A formidable intelligence operative, and again, a great admirer of Mr. Kao, with who he worked very closely.
And in fact, the book is called The Cowboys.
Absolutely. The Cowboys of R&AW, Down Memory Lane.
Right.
It's full of memorable passages. Mr. Raman was a brilliant writer, among other things. But there is, in that book, there is, I thought, a magical passage about, in the chapter 3, which says, Meet Mr. Kao.
Okay.
And in that, there is a purple passage, as I said, and if you permit me, I'll just start with that.
Please.
And I quote now, Mr. Raman writes, like any human being, Kao had his faults as well as his greatness. Like any leader of an organization, he had failures as well as successes. His judgment of men, matters, and events proved presciently right often and wrong on occasions. He was a complex mix of objectivity and subjectivity in matters concerning human relationships. He was a man of tremendous vision, but was not uniformly successful in choosing the right men and women to give shape to his vision.
Right.
His humility and mental generosity occasionally rendered him blind to faults in those around him. He trusted men and women to a fault, little realizing that some of those trusted by him were not worthy of it. And then he goes on to add the positive aspects. Despite all this, no knowledgeable person can dispute that Mr. Kao strode elegantly, effortlessly, and scintillatingly in the intelligence world of his time. In the intelligence world of yesteryear, Kao was first, the rest nowhere. He was a legend and deserved to be. The triumph of 1971, India's role in the great game in Afghanistan, India's assistance to newly independent African countries in building up their intelligence and security setups, India's covert assistance to the African National Congress's anti-apartheid struggle in South Africa, and to the independence movement in Namibia, the happy denouement in Sikkim and Nagaland in the 1970s, and in Mizoram in the 1980s, etc., etc. Kao was there in the midst of it all, active but unseen, unquote. It's a slightly long passage, but I thought...
But it sums it up very well.
Absolutely. A huge canvas tries, I think Mr. Raman has admirably summarized it all in the space of 2 paragraphs.
Yes.
So if I were now to reduce poetry to prose, come down from the level of poetry to prose, I think the unique points about Mr. Kao was he was above all an institution builder with a tremendous vision, and this was the age of institution builders in India, if one may say so. When Mr. Kao was active, from the Sarabhais and Babas and Setnas to the Swaminathans and to the Kaos and Maliks and Rustamjis.
Exactly.
These were all institution builders who set up institutions which have stood the country in good stead over a long period of
And
time.
his another good friend, Sam Manekshaw, in
Absolutely.
1971,
Absolutely.
who again, sort of gave that impetus to the Indian Army after the 1962 defeat, and then of course,
How true.
yeah. So they were, and it's a coincidence of history that they worked together in 1971.
That's right. It was apparently a very stormy relationship to begin with, but became a beautiful one
Absolutely.
as they worked closer and closer together.
Correct.
So, institution builder to begin with.
Right.
Then, secondly, of course, his human relationships. Mr. Kao was, above all, it was the strength of his human relationships, whether it was, the political leadership or his peers or indeed his subordinates and even the last man at the lowest level. I think above all, his humility and compassion is something that always came through, no matter how tense the situation was or however, whatever be the adversity that they were facing. This aspect of human relationships, I think Mr. Kao attached extraordinary importance to it. Team building. I think he had this tremendous ability to delegate the right job to the right person. You and I have had the occasion to talk about, for instance, the role played by the late Nath Banerjee, Mr. Kao.
Nath Babu, as he was called.
Right-hand man,
Right.
whether it was the Bangladesh operations or the Sikkim
operations. Yes.
operations. Mr. Kao trusted Phani Banerjee immensely. Similarly, Mr. Shankaran Nair, when it came to Pakistan.
Right.
And there were a host of others, stalwarts, the pioneers of the R&AW who came along with them, many of them from the external intelligence wing of the Intelligence Bureau to the R&AW when it was formed by Mr. Kao at the instance of Prime Minister Gandhi. So the right man in the right job, he was very particular about it. Third, another great thing about Mr. Kao, I think was his ability to both see the larger picture and also pay attention to the finer details.
The minutest details there, yeah.
Often in the intelligence business, with all, the best of spymasters, I think they sometimes, and I include myself in that, sometimes we tend to develop tunnel vision and we get into the operational microscopics, which is very important. Without that, you cannot do any kind of operations. But if you get bogged down in the intelligence, in the intelligence parlance, it is called operator's bias. You tend to get bogged down in your operations without seeing the larger picture.
Sure.
So Mr. Kao, I think, had the rare ability both to understand the larger picture of importance to the political leadership of the country,
right,
and also to ensure that that the finest of details were taken care of when it came to conducting operations.
Absolutely.
If I may use a contemporary sort of expression, I mean, scholars these days say that intelligence consists of two parts. One is the sense-making enterprise. This is the analysis part of it.
Right.
And the other is the shaping outcomes part of it, which is also called covert action by the Americans. So the sense-making part or the analysis part and the operational part or the shaping outcomes part. Here again, I think the best are good at both. And in fact, to some extent, this is a divide which has its importance. But you cannot have one without the other.
Right.
You cannot, to my understanding, to the best of my understanding, you cannot shape outcomes effectively if you do not really understand the objective realities properly. And there's no point in just passively understanding the
objective realities.
If it's not put to any practical use.
Right.
Mr. Kao attached tremendous importance to both these. He would never run down one or the other. You know, he was extremely fastidious, if I may use the expression, when it came to analysis, disseminating notes to government.
Right.
He would correct the drafts put up by his subordinates, the best of them, with the finest of fine tooth combs, which, well, I'm afraid to say perhaps is not something that is taken so seriously these days. You know, there are some who feel that, well, I mean, all this is not particularly important. This is, if I may use a rather crass expression, kagazbazi. But it's not just kagazbazi. Words have consequences. And Mr. Kao was very, very particular about the advice that was sent out to government, particularly in writing. And that same attention to detail he brought to bear on his operations also. There was nothing slipshod about the operations. Always the pros and cons were examined, the risks and rewards. You know, again, there is an American saying that the best intelligence operatives are risk takers, but they are not risk seekers.
They are not risk seekers and they are not reckless.
They are not reckless. Mr. Kao was, and yes, that's a very, I think, that's a very apt expression that you've used. In fact, if anything, one of the most striking things about Mr. Kao's work is that he was a man of tremendous discretion, tact, and caution.
Right.
You know, there was nothing reckless about Mr. Kao. He was not a Rambo kind of operative. And every single action was preceded by a very careful and methodical examination of the pros and cons, and then step by step, you know, various operational initiatives were put in place. So that aspect of discretion, caution, I think the hallmarks of a traditional spymaster, these were habits that Mr. Kao had honed to perfection.
That's right.
So these are some of the, and of course the last point, I mean, if I may say so, if my answer has not become too long.
That's fine. Yeah.
I think was also, you know, the aspect of bringing professional objectives in perfect harmony with larger political or strategic objectives. Mr. Kao had a very fine political antenna.
Right.
And so therefore, I think he made sure that his, the operational initiatives that the organization took, they were in perfect harmony with the larger strategic or political objectives that the political leadership had in mind.
At that point in time when he was at the helm.
When he was at the helm. So, you know, in his own sort of, I think, language or words, I'm paraphrasing, of course, I think he was very conscious of the fact that, you know, intelligence can always bring an additional dimension to the decision-making table for the political masters to make use of. If you had certain military options, diplomatic options in any situation, he would try to bring an intelligence option also to the table, and then leave it to the leadership. You want to take this or not in whatever way or form, and once you've taken the decision, he was then there to translate that into action.
That's exactly what was proven in both 1971 and Sikkim.
Absolutely.
Just to cite two examples, I'm sure there are several others.
Absolutely.
In fact, I remember when I was researching and through his files and his notings and other papers available in the Nehru Memorial now, the
and Mr. Jairam Ramesh's book as well, using Mr.
Huxer's papers.
Yeah.
So, if you look at that masterful note about where should India have their men or women posted, through the R&AW, in which missions, I think it shows the entire geographic expanse from Africa to, Pacific islands like Fiji, for instance. To, think of Fiji as an outpost, probably nobody else would have thought about it. And once I look at it, when I look back at this effort that I made, it was made easy by the fact that he had kept meticulous notes, and this most people may not know, those who have not read the book, that he actually dictated those, notes to himself, and then it was they were transcribed by a very close family friend and somebody who became closer to him, much younger person.
Yes.
That time, Ramu Damodaran, Foreign Service officer. So that has helped in putting this book together. But the picture that I formed in my mind at that point in time was this, which I have mentioned here. Quoting, of course, his family, his friends, and somebody like Mr. Vikram Sood, who was a former chief, one of his successors. So, what I actually said was that his personality came out. He was rarely photographed. He was a private person.
Yeah.
When I spoke to his daughter, she said, he was an artistic, he had artistic sensibilities.
Absolutely. He was a great sculptor.
Great sculptor. And this is what I've actually sort of, again, I'm going to read like you, that what he said at that point in time, that, about him, what has been said, is something that one must talk about. That he was generous, he was a professional, sensitive, compassionate man, and somebody who was very distant and a stern spymaster in the public eye, if at all he was in the public eye. But he was very compassionate, he was very sensitive to human sensibilities or human feelings. And that's why I thought he could build these institutions, and that's why the headline of this book, or the title of this book, was chosen with care, if you remember that time. I didn't call him a spy, I called him a spy master.
Yes.
And I think that aspect should be taken into consideration when we are talking about what happened in those years of the mid-60s, late 60s, turbulent 1960s. And one thing I got to know after I wrote the book was also how he was chosen by Mrs. Indira Gandhi to try and break the ice with the Chinese in October 1984. I did mention it briefly in the book, but not much was available. But later I have met people who actually escorted him in Beijing, and who went and was talking to his interlocutors, and at the highest level it was almost true that Mrs. Gandhi would have a talk with Deng Xiaoping that time. And that didn't happen, of course, because of her assassination. But the very fact that even after his retirement, after he had hung up his boots formally in 1977, under whatever circumstances that I have written in the book, he was chosen to go and do the outreach to the Chinese. So these are history's, great mysteries, if I can say. If that had happened, what would have happened? Would we have come to the stage where we are today, vis-a-vis the Chinese?
Yes, in fact, that's right. These were developments that took place during Mr. Kao's second coming, so to speak, as senior advisor in the Cabinet Secretariat, 1981 to 84. There were, in fact, two initiatives. I'll come to the China one was the second one.
Yeah.
But equally important was the outreach to the USA at that point of time, Nitin, in 1982 or thereabouts. There had been a lot of, when India was at was the leader of the non-aligned movement way back then, there was a certain estrangement between India and the United States, and there was always this. In fact, that's one of the reasons why the R&AW was formed, about, the quote unquote the foreign hand. Mrs. Gandhi and the leadership then felt that behind many of our internal difficulties there was a foreign hand.
Right.
So India and the US were sort of, to use another famous expression, estranged democracies at that point of time.
Yes.
But when she came back
In 1980.
She used and brought back Mr. Kao from the cold, as it were, the spymaster who came in from the cold.
Yes.
She sent him to the United States of America to, in a sense, cut or to break the ice with the Reagan administration.
Yes, Ronald Reagan was there.
We had misgivings at that point of time behind the Khalistani movement, which was really rearing its head at that point of time. There were sections of the American establishment sections of the American establishment were possibly behind it. The Americans, of course, had their own doubts about our leaning towards the Soviet Union, etc. So Mr. Kao was sent there. And why, Nitin? That's the important thing.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to ask you
because
that.
the senior Bush was the vice president, and the senior Bush had been the head of the CIA in the 1970s during Mr. Kao's heydays. And the senior Bush and Vice President Bush at that time and Mr. Kao had a very good equation.
Exactly.
So that is why Mr. Kao was sent in 1981. And indeed, the meeting that Mr. Kao had with Vice President Bush was extraordinarily helpful in paving the way for Mrs. Gandhi's visit to the United States, historic visit to the US in the subsequent year in 1982. When she met President Reagan.
Right.
And of course...
and Rajiv Gandhi met President Reagan in 1985.
That's right. So, of course, India and the US have traveled a long way from there.
So,
but that was...
the breakthrough moment.
That was the breakthrough moment. And then now, and similarly, China, you're absolutely right. I think Mr. Raman has written about it in his book. So has Mr. Balachandran. Yes, in fact, I'll touch on that also if we have the
sure,
time.
We have time.
On something that Mr. Balachandran has written. It's very pertinent. China, he was indeed in Beijing on that fateful day, October 31, 1984, when Mrs. Gandhi was assassinated, meeting the Chinese leadership. He had, actually traveled incognito to Beijing. And, as far as China is concerned, you have, of course, written about it in your book.
There is a full chapter about what happened in
the investigation into the Kashmir Princess.
Crash.
Absolutely correct. That was 1955 or thereabouts.
Yes.
That is when Mr. Kao was still possibly a young assistant director.
That's right.
Looking after VIP security.
And Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru actually chose him to become the pointsman.
Absolutely.
Into that joint investigation.
Absolutely. And from the Chinese side, it was none else but the redoubtable Zhou Enlai, the number 2 of the country.
That's right.
Older, definitely, I'm sure, to Mr. Kao at that point of time.
Yes.
And
he was a target, actually. And
he
then,
was.
Then
That's
they became
right.
close.
He was supposed to have traveled on that plane which was bombed, but he didn't travel on the R&AW Kashmir Princess.
Right.
So when it was during the Kashmir Princess investigation that Mr. Kao actually struck up a very close working relationship
with Zhou
Enlai, and he's written extensively on all that transpired during the Kashmir Princess investigation.
Yes.
Zhou, of course, was more experienced than Mr. Kao at that point of time, and Mr. Kao has admitted that Zhou's assessment that the UK and Hong Kong would not come clean on what really had happened in Hong Kong at that point of time. He acknowledges that Zhou Enlai's assessment was correct. But Mr. Kao had a long history of dealing with the Chinese leadership also at the at the highest levels, so to speak. So yes, it was no accident that he was chosen for that outreach to the Chinese also. There's also this element of, I think, coolness and composure under sort of pressure.
That's right.
And not pulling his rank anywhere. And Mr. Balachandran has mentioned a telling incident,
Yes.
About a conference, the annual conference of inspectors and directors general of police, which inspectors and directors general of police, which takes place annually.
Yeah.
The 1975 or 1976, I think, annual conference,
Right.
which had taken place in New Delhi. And Mr. Kao in 1976 was very much at the helm of
he
affairs.
was at its peak. At its peak.
Absolutely, as Mr. Balachandran has written, with all extraordinary trappings of power.
Yes.
Although he never flaunted it.
Never. Yeah.
So I believe, and there is in the DGP's or the IGP's conference, there's this Q&A session.
Right.
And I believe one of the SPs or the young DIGs, this was presumably towards the latter part of
the conference.
the year.
Yes.
Because the tragic assassination of Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman in Bangladesh had already taken place by then on 15th of August 1975. So this conference, I think, took place a little after that.
After that, yeah.
And one of the officers present there asks Mr. Kao this question because, did you sort of fail in protecting Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, and wasn't this a failure of the organization?
R&AW,
And Mr. Balachandran has written that it was some of those present felt that this was a slightly
impertinent question.
Yes, and they thought that they were expecting, Mr. Kao to sort of explode or get angry.
Yes.
And apparently, Mr. Kao did not, did not turn a hair. He did not raise his voice. There was an absolutely, his reply was cool, composed, and delivered with
matter of fact.
Delivered with the most exquisite politeness that he was famous
known for. Yes.
And he simply said that, he had, it was not the fault of the R&AW. In any case, I mean, protecting the leader of a foreign country was not the primary responsibility of the agency of another country.
Right.
But be that as it may, India had very good relations with Bangladesh and Sheikh Mujibur Rahman at that point of time.
Yes.
And he said that he had personally
gone
and warned Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. He had delivered the warning, and yet,
the tragic incident
took place. So the reply was irrespective of the difference in rank between India's top spymaster and a relatively junior officer. The question was taken in all seriousness, and a professional answer was given in a detached and professional manner.
I think that shows all these incidents we can go on and on about it till the cows come home, about Mr. Kao and his impact and his principles that he applied to the organization that he built. The fact is that you needed somebody like him. It's an accident of history, perhaps, coincidence, whatever you want to call it, to build that organization at that point in time in India's history. And India was under pressure. I mean, we are not a strong economy at that point in time. There were so many problems. There were insurgencies in the northeast. There was the Cold War, which India was one of the playgrounds of the Cold War.
That's right.
All that, in the midst of all that, to do what India did in 1971 in East Pakistan and Bangladesh, to creation of Bangladesh, is a tribute to not just the resilience of this nation state, but also such organizations and their leaders, really.
That's right. Absolutely.
If you want to add something to that, maybe.
A final point, perhaps, if I may, Nitin. The other striking point about Mr. Kao's work, if you ask me, was It was very simple. It was a quiet but firm determination to, I think, to pursue India's national interests in the best possible manner.
That's right.
Coolly but firmly. And in that pursuit, I think Mr. Kao was relentless.
That's true. And I think one lesson that I see as an observer, as an outsider, is that most of the intelligence work has to be behind closed doors, behind the scene. And like Mr. Sood, I think, said during this book that I was writing, is that we are often known by our failures rather than the successes. So the intelligence agencies really cannot flaunt their successes.
Absolutely.
And there must be so many of them, so many, numerous successes, but it gets identified by the failures. Like Mr. Kao would have felt himself that Mrs. Gandhi's assassination couldn't be prevented.
Yes.
And I think therefore he tendered his resignation. But be that as it may, I think these personalities come once in a while, in a century perhaps, and India was lucky to have him and others like him during that nation building process or the phase. And that's why I thought, this tribute to him was necessary, even if there is this so-called book which is not complete, I must confess. It was written as a tribute to the personality and of course to the organizations he created. So I think that's all we could really bring to you in this short time of about 40 minutes or so about RN Kao, variously known as Gentleman Spymaster. I mean, I chose this title, this term. If you ask his friends, they would say he was a gentleman. If you asked his late wife, Malini Kao, she would say he was a saint. She did say this to me even at the ripe old age of 99 when I met her. And of course, people like you who have been working in that organization as his successors, who will always remember Mr. Kao as someone who actually laid the foundations of this organization and the principles that he applied to that organization. I think we can go on and on, like I said, but I must stop here. But do keep watching StratNews Global and of course keep sending feedback. And if you have not read Mr. Raman's book, which if you can hold to the camera this side, this is Mr. Raman's book, much sort of precedes my book in 2019. I borrowed quite a lot from that book and of course Mr. Kao's writings and his files. Hopefully we'll have more details of his life and his career and his contribution to the world of intelligence as we go forward in the next few years. But for the time being, I must stop here. Goodbye and do keep watching StratNews Global.